Right. So today we're going to do a deep dive into something pretty big
Okay.
in the tech world.
Yeah.
Specifically, NVIDIA's bid to buy ARM Holdings
Right.
back in 2020.
Huge.
Now, you flagged this in our listener survey
Yeah.
as a moment that you thought
Yeah.
really kind of told a story about the chip industry.
Absolutely. And it was huge news
Yeah.
when it happened.
Let's back up for a second, make sure
Yeah.
we're all on the same page about ARM.
Sure.
ARM Holdings is a UK-based company, and they're kind of a giant, even though they're a little bit behind the scenes.
Yeah.
They don't actually make chips themselves,
Right.
but they design the architecture.
The architecture that goes into...
Goes into the chips.
Yeah.
And these chips are...
A lot of chips.
like everywhere.
Billions of devices.
Billions of devices.
Phones and
Especially mobile.
all sorts of embedded devices.
Like think Apple,
Yep.
Qualcomm, Samsung.
All using ARM.
Using ARM designs in their phones.
Yep. Their influence is massive.
It is massive.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting because...
And it all stems from their unique licensing model, too, which we can talk about.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Okay, so NVIDIA, for a lot of people, it's graphics cards, right?
It is graphics processing units.
GPUs.
The things gamers love.
The things that gamers love, yeah.
But also, increasingly, they're very important in artificial intelligence.
Absolutely, like AI training and stuff.
Yeah, high-performance computing in general.
Yeah. So the big question is, why would a company that is known for high-performance graphics want to buy this?
This company that designs chips for...
UK company that designs mobile chips.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to try to figure out today.
Exactly.
When in the process, we're going to kind of figure out, what NVIDIA's motivations were, what they thought this could do.
Yeah, and the ripple effects.
Ripple effects, exactly.
Of this proposed acquisition, why it was ultimately blocked, and where both companies are today.
Yeah.
And I think in the process of doing all that, we'll get a really fascinating look into, kind of the high stakes
chess game of the semiconductor world.
With semiconductor industry, which is really,
driving so much.
It's the foundation of
everything these days.
Our technological world.
Yeah. Okay. So
NVIDIA,
it wasn't just that they wanted to start making, NVIDIA phones.
NVIDIA phones, right?
Right, exactly. Their ambitions were bigger than that.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, one of the areas where ARM really shines is, the mobile market.
Yeah.
And the Internet of Things market.
And that's exploding.
Which is absolutely exploding, right? So ARM's architecture is already the dominant force in smartphones.
Right.
And in all these other connected devices that we're seeing,
Yeah. Increasingly everywhere in our lives.
Like smartwatches.
And
smart fridges. Cars, industrial sensors, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And so, at the time of the proposed acquisition, I think the forecasts were projecting something like 75 billion?
75 billion.
Connected devices by 2025.
That's almost like 10 devices for every person on the planet.
It's a staggering number.
Yeah. So NVIDIA saw that and they were like...
Right. They saw the writing on the wall.
Yeah.
They were like, this is where the future is headed.
No, we got to get in on this.
We got to be a part of this. And ARM is already there.
They're already there.
Yeah. And so it was a way to sort of jump into that market.
Yeah.
In a really significant way.
And it wasn't just about market size. It was also about...
It was about the future of computing itself.
Yeah.
Edge computing is becoming increasingly important.
Right.
And that's where... data is processed.
Closer to where it's...
Closer to the source.
Collected, rather than in a centralized cloud.
Yeah, and that makes sense when you think about,
Exactly.
Self-driving cars.
Self-driving cars are a perfect example.
Yeah.
A self-driving car needs to make split-second decisions.
Right.
It can't be relying on a data center.
That's miles away.
That's, hundreds or thousands of miles away.
Yeah.
So ARM's energy efficiency makes its designs really well suited.
Perfect for those.
For that kind of application.
Yeah, okay, so that's mobile.
Right.
That's IoT. What other strategic areas were they looking at?
Well, another really significant area was the whole field of automotive AI.
Which kind of ties into what we were just talking about.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
It's bigger than that.
It's bigger than that.
Yeah.
Self-driving technology is a huge potential market.
Yeah, and NVIDIA was already...
And NVIDIA was already a player there.
Exactly.
They were already providing the AI brains for autonomous vehicles.
Yeah.
So the idea was, if they could integrate ARM's processor technology with NVIDIA's AI expertise, that would create this really powerful synergy, that would allow them to
really be a leader in that.
Be a leader in the next generation of vehicles. And, we see companies like Tesla and Waymo pushing the boundaries in this area. And so I think NVIDIA saw an opportunity to really be a major force in that space.
And so they're thinking about the device in your pocket, the core you might be writing in someday.
Exactly. What about the infrastructure that powers it all?
Data centers.
Data centers, So data centers are becoming increasingly important for running all sorts of AI workloads.
All the AI stuff is happening in the cloud.
In the cloud, exactly. So all the machine learning, the natural language processing.
All that stuff.
And ARM's low-power designs were starting to be seen as an alternative to the traditional power-hungry chips
in data centers
that were being used in data centers. And so NVIDIA saw this as an opportunity to
really beef up
to really enhance their offerings in the data center space.
And maybe even compete with.
And maybe even challenge.
Intel and AMD.
The big players in that space.
So mobile IoT, automotive AI, data centers. They had ambitions across the board. Was there anything else that made ARM so appealing?
I think that the other thing that made ARM really appealing was their business model.
You mentioned this before.
So they licensed their chip designs to
hundreds of companies.
And so by acquiring ARM, NVIDIA wouldn't just be getting the technology. They would be getting this huge existing customer base. And they would also be in a position to really influence
the future of
the semiconductor industry.
By controlling the design.
By shaping the designs that all these other companies. It's not just about today's market. It's about shaping the future.
It's about shaping the future.
Okay, so you mentioned that NVIDIA's decision was likely backed by, extensive market research. What kind of data and insights would have made them think this is such a good idea?
One of the things that was really happening at the time was this huge surge in demand for AI-specific chips. And so, there were reports coming out from industry groups like the Semiconductor Industry Association that were showing, year-over-year growth in global semiconductor sales. And a lot of that growth was being fueled by AI. And so ARM's designs are known for their efficiency. And so NVIDIA could have used those designs to create even more powerful and efficient
AI
processors. And so that would have allowed them to really meet that demand. That was emerging in cloud computing and machine learning and deep learning. So the market was saying, we want more AI.
More AI.
ARM offered a path to more efficient AI.
Exactly.
So it was a good fit.
It is a good fit.
What about the IoT and mobile markets that we talked about earlier? How did market research play into that?
The sheer scale of that market was really striking.
75 billion devices.
75 billion devices by 2025.
It's hard to even imagine.
It's a hard number to wrap your head around. And market research was showing that ARM was absolutely central.
They were in everything.
They were in everything. Smart home devices, wearables.
Industrial stuff.
Industrial automation. You name it.
And for NVIDIA, they were used to.
They were used to
PCs and data centers.
The world of PCs and data centers. And so this was a way for them to
enter this whole new
world of devices.
And they didn't have to build it from scratch.
They didn't have to start from zero.
ARM was already there.
ARM had already built the infrastructure.
What about the competitive landscape? Because we know Intel, AMD,
big players.
Huge players. In the chip world.
And they're not going to just let NVIDIA.
No, they're not going to just sit back.
Walk all over them.
And let NVIDIA take over. So owning ARM would have given NVIDIA a really significant competitive advantage. It would have allowed them to integrate ARM's technology across their product line.
Create new stuff.
Create new and compelling solutions.
That Intel and AMD couldn't match.
That their competitors might have struggled to match. And so it was really about securing a more robust and influential position.
On a very competitive
market.
And you touched on this a little bit before, but it's becoming increasingly important. Sustainability and energy efficiency.
Absolutely.
How did that factor into
NVIDIA's thinking.
ARM's architecture is known for its low power consumption.
Right.
And as we've become more and more concerned about
climate change
and the environmental impact of technology, that becomes even more important.
Absolutely.
And so, integrating ARM's technology could have allowed NVIDIA to position itself as a leader in providing energy-efficient solutions.
Which would appeal to businesses.
Which would appeal to businesses, consumers.
Consumers, everybody.
Everybody.
Yeah. Okay, so it seems like this is...
It seems like a slam dunk.
A really good idea.
Yeah, on paper.
On paper.
Yeah.
So what happened?
So why didn't it work out?
Why did this $40 billion deal?
Well, that's where the regulatory hurdles and the industry concerns came into play.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it was the antitrust concerns that killed the deal.
Okay.
Regulators in the U.S., in the UK...
EU.
The EU and China...
All over the world.
All over the world. They all raised red flags.
Okay, so what were they worried about?
Well, the central concern was that if NVIDIA owned ARM, they could restrict ARM's neutral licensing model.
Okay, so why was that neutrality so important?
Well, ARM's success was built on that neutrality because they didn't actually manufacture chips themselves.
Right.
They could license their designs to anybody.
Yeah.
So you had companies like Apple and Qualcomm and Samsung.
Yeah, all using ARM.
All using ARM designs, but they could differentiate themselves through their own chip implementations.
Gotcha.
And so the fear was that under NVIDIA's ownership, ARM might be incentivized to prioritize
NVIDIA's
interests.
Okay.
And so that could lead to higher costs for other licensees or restricted access to key technologies.
So it would be an unlevel playing field.
It would be an unlevel playing field.
So the very thing that made ARM so valuable was what made regulators so nervous.
It was a double-edged sword.
Yeah. And it wasn't just the regulators.
Right.
The other companies that rely on ARM.
The companies that rely on ARM.
Were not happy about this.
They were not happy.
Yeah.
Companies like Google and Microsoft and Qualcomm. They all voiced opposition.
Because they didn't want...
They didn't want to see the market monopolized. They didn't want to lose access to
this independent
supplier of chip technology.
And you mentioned that geopolitics played a role in this too?
Yeah, I mean, the semiconductor industry...
is a big deal.
Is very important.
For a lot of...
Especially in the U.S.-China... Rivalry.
Yeah.
And so China was not happy.
About this deal.
About the prospect of an American company owning a key UK-based technology provider.
Yeah.
And so that added another layer of complexity.
Okay. So you specifically mentioned the CMA in the UK and the FTC.
The FTC in the U.S.
In the U.S.
Yeah.
What were their main arguments?
Well, they both conducted in-depth investigations.
Yeah.
And they concluded that the deal would harm competition and stifle innovation.
Okay.
They were worried that NVIDIA would have both the incentive and the ability to disadvantage ARM's licensees.
Yeah.
And so they felt that this would lead to less choice, higher prices, and just a less dynamic semiconductor ecosystem.
Okay, so the regulators stepped in to protect the market.
To protect the market.
To keep competition fair.
Exactly.
To keep innovation happening.
Yeah.
So 2022, the deal is off.
The deal is dead.
What happens next?
Well, so SoftBank, which is ARM's parent company, they decided to take ARM public again. So they did an IPO.
The initial public offering.
Yeah, on the NASDAQ in 2023.
Right.
And so that allowed ARM to maintain its independence.
It was the big concern.
Which was the big concern.
Yeah.
And it also allowed them to raise a lot of money.
To fund future growth.
To fund future growth.
Okay, so ARM went from being a part of this big deal to being back on their own.
Back on their own.
Yeah.
It's a public company.
What about NVIDIA?
What do they do?
NVIDIA continued to invest in AI and in other semiconductor technologies.
Okay.
But interestingly, they recently acquired a stake in ARM.
So not full ownership.
Not full ownership,
a stake.
But a stake.
Okay.
So they don't have control.
Yeah.
But they do have some influence.
Okay.
And they clearly see potential for collaboration.
In the AI world.
In the AI world, which is where they're really focused.
Okay, so they couldn't buy the whole thing.
Right.
But they got their foot in the door.
They got their foot in the door.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're still interested in
working with AR.
Working with AR.
Yeah. So what does this all mean?
Well, I think
for the future? It means that ARM is going to continue to be a very important player in the semiconductor industry.
Yeah.
They're going to continue to provide their designs
to all these different companies.
All these different companies.
Yeah.
And NVIDIA is going to continue to focus on its strengths. AI GPUs.
Yeah.
High performance computing.
Yeah.
But they're also going to look for opportunities to partner with ARM.
Yeah.
And so I think we could see some interesting collaborations.
In those areas we talked about before.
In areas like AI and mobile computing.
The Internet of Things.
And the Internet of Things.
Yeah.
And so it's a way for them to kind of
benefit
from ARM's ecosystem.
Yeah.
Without actually having to own the company.
Without all the headaches.
Without all the headaches of trying to acquire them.
All right, so let's recap.
Okay.
NVIDIA wanted to buy ARM.
Right.
They thought it was a good idea for all these reasons.
They had a clear strategic rationale. It was backed by market research.
Mobile IoT AI.
All these growth markets.
Data centers.
That they wanted to be a part of.
They wanted to be a part of it.
Yeah.
But regulators said no.
Regulators said no.
Other companies said no.
The industry pushed back.
ARM went back to being independent.
Back to being independent.
NVIDIA still has a stake.
Still has a stake.
And is looking to collaborate.
Looking to collaborate.
Okay, so for you, our listener, we host this deep dive has
given you a better understanding.
Given you a better understanding of this whole saga.
And this really important episode in the semiconductor industry.
And what it means for the future.
What it means for the future.
Of technology and for
the devices that we all use.
Your phone, your car, your
everything.
Smart fridge.
Everything.
Okay, so now a question for you to think about.
Yeah, what's next?
What's next?
What's going to happen? Given that the deal failed,
right?
NVIDIA still has a stake in ARM. Yeah, are they going to collaborate?
What's going to happen?
Are they going to compete?
Yeah, how is this going to affect?
How's it going to affect
the future?
The devices that we use every day.
Technology?
It's a really interesting question.
It's a big question.
Yeah.
And I think
we'll have to wait and see.
We'll have to wait and see how it plays out.
But it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
We'll see you next time.
See you next time.